Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things I'm concerned about is adding still more energy-related regulatory mandates, and then that raises costs, so then we increase subsidies, and we have this ongoing interference with the market. So let me ask a question for Ms. Tubb, just to start with. Is there a marketplace for construction techniques and products and appliances that are more energy efficient? In other words, is that a selling point? Do consumers become aware that some things are more energy efficient than others? In the absence of government mandates and subsidies, wouldn't energy efficiency still be a relevant market selling point?
Absolutely. I think consumers express that in the choices they make when they're purchasing materials, equipment, appliances. There may be an education issue there, and that is also a place for the market to fill that need. But I think Americans do preference efficiency when it makes sense for them. And
the energy efficiency sometimes is a choice that involves trade-offs, right? I mean, I don't know, if you're in the market for a dishwasher that's more energy efficient will save you money. That's attractive. But you might also want one that's quiet. You might want one that does it cycle quickly. Should the government decide which of those features is the priority, or should the consumer decide?
I think the consumer, and it gets exactly to those trade-offs, that efficiency is one aspect that Americans value, but for a variety of reasons, whether size of family, durability, preferences, quietness, there are other things that come into the decision-making process, and a bureaucrat, no matter how well-intended, just can't understand the complexity of that decision-making process.
And it's not uniform, right? It's going to completely vary by consumers. I want to go to a point that you made that I think is a really important one about the elasticity of energy. I sometimes think you can infer from some of the things that I hear that if we just produced less oil and gas, then the people would consume less. How much variability do people have in their consumption of energy as a general matter?
I think it's particularly inelastic when it comes to housing. As I mentioned earlier, we see the consequences of that, particularly in winter, and they're devastating. When people can't afford energy, lives are at stake, and that's how inelastic this is. And I think that's why talking about reducing fossil fuel use is particularly problematic, because you're talking about people's well-being. And just to put that in a little bit of context, 80% of Americans' heat, power, and transportation comes from coal, oil, and natural gas. These are not inconsequential energy resources.
Right. And sure, a family can decide, well, we just can't afford to go on vacation, and so they'll save some money and burn a little bit less gas because they won't drive to the place they were going to go. But the vast majority of energy consumption, as you point out, they really don't have any choice. They have to have the lights on. They have to have appliances running. They have to go to and from work. And when we have policies that drive up that cost, the standard of living inevitably just declines, it seems to me. I want to just shift a little bit to resiliency outside of the energy issue. I think there's a role for government, especially state and local government, in developing building codes that ensure that homes are built to a standard that makes them more resilient, especially in the face of natural disasters. By the way, it is worth pointing out, it's an objective fact that the cost of the damage caused by extreme weather events has been declining as a percentage of America's economy. That's been a trend for some time now. But it still happens, and it's devastating when it does. We have a flood insurance program that insures homes against flood damage. It'd be one thing if the flood insurance program charged rates that were commensurate with the risk of a property, but we know it does not do that. It undercharges, and we know that for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is Congress has to bail out the program periodically to the tune of $30 billion over the last 2 decades. And yet, amazingly, the NFIP will cover the cost of repair or replacement, even if your home has been flooded multiple times. Does a flood insurance policy like this actually encourage mitigation and resilience, or is there a moral hazard component to it?
Well, I'm not an expert in the program, but GAO has noticed problems with the program with their high-risk list. I would recommend research by my colleague Diane Katz, but certainly a climate-ready home is not one that we're constantly bailing out by these programs that distort risk, or encourage risky development in floodplains, and I think discourage adaptation. It makes no sense to have a climate-ready home that is constantly in the way of danger. And unfortunately, programs like this just incentivize repeated decision-making like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.